Call the Minister.
I want to thank both spokespeople for their comments. I think we actually need a reality check here in relation to the problem of fraud, mistake and error as it's described. So I just want to say the figures that I have as if you like, passed through the CNAG are for 2011. The 2012 figures are still being examined by the CNAG. So I'm just going to use the 2011 figures. First of all, in 2011, there were a total of over 63,000 overpayments, which amounted to 92.4 million. Now, in the totality of the social welfare spend of 2011 of 20.7 billion, deputies will appreciate this is a very small amount, and that the overwhelming majority of people who are involved with the social welfare system and recipients of the social welfare system or recipients of retirement pensions are utterly honest. They get what they're entitled to get, no more and no less. So just let's say that at the outset. However, I want to put it to the deputies that 92.4 million for 1 year is a significant amount. And what we want to get, deputies, is to a kind of real-time situation where if fraud, error or overpayment occurs, we move to recover that in a structured way as quickly as possible. So the message goes out to people that if in fact they have received overpayments, that as with say other institutions, they would be obliged to repay over a period of time the overpayment. And I really want to say that to people, because that 92.4 million for 2011, if we don't recover as much as possible of that, it's people like our pensioners who are going to suffer, because their legitimate entitlements are going to be put under the squeeze. So just let me say, overpayment is broken down into 3 areas: fraud, non-fraud, and estate recoveries from the estates of people who've died, where, for instance, it's emerged that in fact perhaps there were significantly more assets, bank accounts or other types of assets than was disclosed at the time perhaps when the person was making a social welfare application, and it was discovered subsequent in terms of information arising perhaps at the probate stage after the person's death. So fraud cases arise mainly on foot of false declarations by customers concerning their employment, somebody seeking job seekers who's actually working as well, and evidence is obtained of that by investigation, or increasingly nowadays by somebody tipping off, because people are worried about social welfare money going astray. Secondly, we're talking about in non-fraud cases, they're primarily due to customers, and this is what I want to particularly say to Deputy O'Dea. These are primarily due to customers or third-party error or departmental error. And estate cases arise where undisclosed means by customers come to light after their death, when their estate is being sorted out. Now, just let me say, in 2011, suspected fraud, and deputies may be a little bit surprised at this, accounted actually for an estimated 35 million of the 92, and it amounted to 38% of the cases, and it concerned 20,585 people. In relation to customer third-party error, and sometimes that's a rather polite term, because somebody arrives in, turns out that they have a partner, but when perhaps it's discussed with the officers, the partner just arrived back last week or the week before. And, you know, we wouldn't have the time or the resources to get involved in litigation in every case. but people would say, yes, I now have a partner again, and in fact I'm going to reflect that, or we're going to reflect that in terms of our application to social welfare. So the third-party error amounts to 40.5 million. That's 44% of the 92 million, and it's 36,000 cases. Departmental error, and I just want to say this to Deputy OD, accounts for a very small amount. It accounts for 5.5 million, or 6% of the cases. It amounts to about 6,000 cases. Now, estate issues that arise largely after somebody has died and their estate has been settled accounts for about 11.5 million. It's 12% of the total, and it's 371 cases. So we're talking about 63,000 people involved, or customers of the department involved in this. We're talking about 92 million being the estimated loss to the department. And as I say, in relation to fraud, there may be on the part of officials at times, a lot of suspicion that in fact there was a failure to accurately report to social welfare the current status. But we would not have the capacity to go in great detail into the history of it, and it might not be worthwhile to do so. But what we do have to do, and I think we have an obligation to do, is where these particular cases come to attention, that the monies, as far as possible, are recovered. And what I have set up in relation to people who currently are still receiving a social welfare payment is what I think is a very humane and considered way of, first of all, remember the person will be assessed with an overpayment, and they would, if they wished, have a right, coming to Deputy O'Snothick's point, they would have a right to appeal that through the appeal system. Now, if they're currently in receipt of social welfare, that can now be recovered at a maximum rate of 15%, which would be up to €28 a week from the primary payment that the individual receives. So if they're on job seekers, it would be out of €188 a week. Now, I think that that is quite a considered way of doing it. I don't as yet, Deputy O'Snothick, have statistics on the exact amounts and the exact recoveries, except that it is a process that's underway at the moment in social welfare offices right around the country. And as we get further into the year, as you know, it only came into effect from January. We had to set up systems and so on to deal with it. And we are very anxious to take into account particularly extenuating circumstances that may be there. And, officials in the Department of Social Welfare, by and large, have had an acknowledged reputation, for the most part, for doing that. So we then come to somebody who has, received an overpayment. As I said, 38% are from fraud, 44% from customer error, just 6% from departmental error, and 12% from issues arising from estates. And the people involved are no longer in payment by social welfare, so we can't recover the money from them through the social welfare deduction process. What we are seeking in this legislation, and I really want to ask for the support of the House on this, is the power to go and get an attachment order in relation to their current earnings, up to, again, the same limit, and after very careful consideration, or in relation to their bank accounts, because sometimes it can be discovered, and I've given the deputies details before of people who apparently were reliant only on a social welfare income, but because they had other businesses, had in fact amassed significant bank savings in a number of the cases that have been published in the different reports on fraud. So I think it's appropriate that we should be able to do this in a structured way that is fair and that does take into account the circumstances of the individual, but that it does mean, as I say, that the message goes out that the department, is not a soft touch in relation to fraud or abuse of the social welfare system, but that we recover in a structured way. The alternative that's available to us until I brought this in has been, I suppose, do nothing. Don't try and recover the money at all. Now, probably when the good years were around, it was quite possible to take that approach, but that is often quite scandalous in relation to taxpayers who are paying their tax and their PRSI, and not acceptable to them. The second would be to go the route that is available without this amendment in relation to people who are no longer in receipt of a social welfare payment, is to go through civil proceedings through the courts. Well, deputies know very well that that is expensive and lengthy and onerous. This will provide us with a mechanism which will allow us to recover money for taxpayers who are paying the PRSI, and particularly for people who are receiving an income from social welfare and who want to see that income spent on people who have a correct entitlement. And that is the vast majority of people who are in the social welfare system. The the actual rate, the overpayments recorded, total overpayments is 0.44% of departmental expenditure. There may be other areas where we still have to find out, and we're bringing in a huge amount of IT, which enables us to check an identity. We've launched the Special Investigations Unit, an updated and very active programme in relation to fraud detection. We have members of the public making contact at a very significant rate with the department to indicate areas where they feel that the system may be abused, or that the department may not know the full facts, and that there are facts that the department ought to be aware of. So I think the amendment is measured, and I think the amendment will help to recover significant amounts of money for the department as we develop this system. And I will be very conscious of what deputies have said. And Deputy O'Snuddick has talked about the rent system in the Dublin City Council. I'd certainly be aware that people who understate rent, it's an awful shock to them when, for different reasons, that finally catches up with them. But similarly with this, the department is very conscious of this, and we want to provide for this in a structured way. And we're not saying, by the way, that if somebody has an overpayment, and I think Deputy O'Snuddick was saying that with Dublin City Council, if you underpaid your rent, a whole range of services and options suddenly completely closed off to you, which was very difficult for a family. We're simply saying that out of the principal person concerned, their singular payment, the deductions are up to 15%, and if they're now working and no longer a direct customer of the department, we will have a similar arrangement of recovering at a rate of 15%.